Hi, I'm Mark, and today I need to talk about the Sudan, although this is my British channel, but because of a British mission. Like the US, Great Britain has brought in diplomatic representatives from the embattled Sudan. Amid an escalation of violence and threats against embassy staff, British forces have completed a complex and swift evacuation of British diplomats and their families, as Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said on Twitter on Sunday. He also called on the parties to the conflict in the African country to lay down their arms and call for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire so that civilians could leave the conflict areas. According to Defense Secretary Ben Wallace, the armed forces carried out the operation on Sunday morning in the Sudanese capital Khartoum alongside the US, France, and other allies. Germans have been there as well. More than 1,200 British forces were involved in the operation. Foreign Secretary James Cleverly also wrote on Twitter that the top priority remains the safety of British citizens. Another attempt at a ceasefire in Sudan has failed. In Khartoum, civilians were stuck in their homes while fighting rages outside. The German Bundeswehr was also again preparing an evacuation. And according to eyewitnesses and media reports, heavy fighting continued in the Sudanese capital Khartoum, despite the beginning of celebrations at the end of the Islamic month of fasting Ramadan, where they agreed a ceasefire from Friday morning. The RSF, that's one side of the battle, wrote on Twitter that they were supposed to open humanitarian corridors for the evacuation of citizens on the Muslim holiday Eid al-Fitr. Sudanese should be able to visit their families on the important day for Muslims, it said. However, the Sudanese military did not confirm the ceasefire, they say. According to the United Nations, thousands of Khartoum residents have been stuck in their home for days, many of them without electricity or running water. Food, petrol, and medicines ran out. And according to media reports, the capital was again bombed in the morning, and in addition, soldiers of the Sudanese army are said to have combed residential areas. In the fiercely contested African state of Sudan, some countries have now begun evacuating their own nationals and other foreigners. Saudi Arabia said it had taken 157 Saudis and people of other nationalities out of the country. Television pictures showed people on a warship. It is not yet known what nationality they have. Kuwait said some of its citizens had arrived in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia, and Jordan said it had started evacuating 300 people. A foreign diplomat said some embassy staff in Sudan's capital Khartoum are hoping to be flown out of the country in the coming days. And the US embassy warned US citizens that traveling in vehicle convoys from Khartoum is definitely at their own risks. The fighting between the two most powerful generals in the country and their units broke out just over a week ago. The two men have led the country into northeast Africa with around 46 million inhabitants since two joint military coups in 2019 and 2021. De facto President Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, who is also the commander-in-chief of the army, is fighting with the military against his deputy Mohamed Hamdan Daglo, the leader of the powerful paramilitary group Rapid Support Forces, or RSF. For years, power has been said to be handed over to a civilian government. Al-Burhan repeated this in his first video message since the fighting began, but there were no concrete signs of the transfer of power at the whole time. According to the World Health Organization, more than 400 people have been killed in the fighting between the Sudanese military and the influential paramilitary group RSF. The conflicting parties announced on Friday they had agreed a ceasefire. I said that earlier, but still explosions and shots could be heard again. And according to observers, the trigger for the fighting was a dispute over the details of the RSF's incorporation into the military as part of the transition to a civilian government in Sudan. The military, as I said, staged a second coup in October 2021 and has ruled the country, which is one of the poorest in the world, ever since. And now that British had to be evacuated there as well, as the German Bundeswehr evacuated German citizens from there as well. And I talk more about this on my magazine channel because I already had to talk about it last week in my Africa video. when it already started, and the development is there that I do this week on my magazine channel as well. And because a lot of countries are affected by the fights there. And I'll see you in my next video. I'll be back.